The elevator doors almost saved me. I had my finger on the button, lobby, just press lobby, when his hand shot between the closing panels and they shuddered back open like they were afraid of him too. Daeho. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. That's what 2 years of conditioning does to a body. It learns to be terrified before it even has time to think. Funny running into you here, he said, stepping inside. He wasn't loud. He never was in public. That was the thing people never understood when I tried to explain it later. They imagined screaming, broken dishes, dramatic scenes that other people could witness and confirm. But Daeho was surgical. He saved his real self for closed doors. And right now, the elevator doors were closing behind him. I pressed lobby again. Then again. Stop doing that. He covered my hand with his, pressing it flat against the cold metal panel. Not squeezing. Just covering. Trapping. You look crazy. That was his favorite word for me. Crazy. Unstable. Difficult. He'd spent 2 years convincing me it was true, and even now, 6 months out, some broken part of me still checked. Am I overreacting? Am I making this worse? The elevator started moving. 32nd floor. 31st. I heard you're working at Hansung Group now. He leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, performing casual. Nice building. Your boss know about your little breakdown last year? The hospital stay? I kept my eyes on the numbers. 30th floor. I could tell him. He said it lightly, like he was offering me something. Or you could have coffee with me. Catch up. Please leave me alone. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. It always did around him. Something about his presence compressed me, made me feel like I was 17 and stupid again. You are crazy, he said, almost fond. Still so dramatic. 28th floor. He pushed off the wall and stepped toward me, and I pressed myself into the corner, and the humiliating thing, the thing I'll never fully forgive myself for, is that I didn't scream. I just went small. I folded inward like a piece of paper and made myself as compact as possible and stared at the number panel and prayed for the lobby. The elevator stopped. Not a floor. Not the lobby. A button pressed from inside, and we hung there between the 27th and 26th floors, suspended, and I thought, this is it. This is how it happens. Then I noticed the man in the back corner. He'd been there the whole time. I'd registered him when I stepped in, a talish, dark coat, expensive in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself, and then Daeho had filled up all available space in my brain and I'd forgotten about him entirely. He hadn't moved. He was still standing against the back wall, but now he was looking at us. Looking at Daeho, specifically. And his expression was, nothing. That's the word. Absolutely nothing. The kind of controlled blankness that takes enormous effort to maintain, that exists precisely because something is happening underneath it. She asked you to leave her alone, he said. His Korean was soul-accented, unhurried. He wasn't loud. He wasn't performing for anyone. Daeho blinked. He turned around slowly, the way men do when they're confident the interruption can't possibly be serious. Excuse me? You heard her. The man looked at his phone briefly, then pocketed it. She said please. That was polite of her. I'm less polite. Something happened to Daeho's face. A flicker. I'd never seen it before, I'd never seen anything puncture that smug surface, but for just a second, something moved behind his eyes. Mind your business, Daeho said, but the edge in his voice had changed pitch. The man pushed off the wall and stepped forward, and the strange thing was that he didn't raise his voice, he didn't touch anyone, he moved at a completely ordinary speed, and Daeho took a step backward. Automatic. Instinctive. Like a body that knew something the mind hadn't processed yet. My name is Kong Saiwin, the man said quietly. He said it the way you'd state a weather forecast. Like information. You should think carefully about what you do next. The elevator resumed moving. I don't know what I looked like in that moment. I was gripping the metal railing along the wall hard enough that my fingers had gone white. I was staring at the side of this stranger's face, at his jaw, the clean straight line of it, absolutely still, and I was trying to understand what had just happened. Lobby. The doors opened. Daeho walked out first, quickly, without looking back. Without another word. That silence was somehow more frightening than anything he'd ever said to me, because Daeho always had a parting shot, always needed the last word, and he didn't take it. The man, Kang Saiwon, waited. He gestured toward the open doors. After you. I walked out on shaking legs and made it as far as the marble column just outside the elevator bank before I had to stop. I pressed my back against it and breathed. Counted the breath like my therapist taught me. He stopped a few feet away. Not close. He didn't crowd me. You work in this building, he asked. 22nd floor. My voice still wasn't fully mine yet. Hansung Group. Marketing. He nodded once. He took a card from his coat pocket and held it out, not pressing it into my hand, just offering, letting me decide. I looked at it. KS Holdings. Director of Acquisitions. Floor 34. If he comes near you again, he said, call that number. I looked up at him. He had one of those faces that's difficult to read not because it's empty but because it's controlled, everything deliberately placed, nothing accidental. Why? I asked. He considered the question seriously, which wasn't what I expected. Because you said please, he said finally. And you shouldn't have had to. He walked away. No drama. No backward glance. The lobby crowd parted for him in that subtle, unconscious way that crowds do for certain people, not because they saw him, exactly, but because some animal part of the human brain registers a specific kind of presence and adjusts. I stood there holding his card. If you've ever wished, just once, that someone would step in when no one else would, you know exactly how I felt in that lobby. Hit like. This story is just beginning. I told myself I wouldn't call. I told myself it was a random act of human decency, nothing more, and that I would tuck the card into my desk drawer and feel grateful and never think about Kang Saiwon again. I believed that for approximately 4 days. On the 4th day, I walked out of my building at 7 p.m. to find Daeho leaning against the car parked directly in front of the entrance. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there. Just making sure I saw him. I went back inside and stood in the lobby for 45 minutes, watching through the glass until he left. That night I took the card out of my desk drawer. I didn't call. I sent a text, because calling felt too vulnerable, too intimate, too much like asking for something I didn't deserve. This is Yuna Park. From the elevator. I think he followed me to my building. The response came in 90 seconds. I know. It won't happen again. 3 words. Period. No explanation. I sat on my apartment floor and read those 3 words 11 times. I know. He already knew. Before I texted him, he already knew. I should have found that alarming. I know that now. I know that a rational person would have found the immediate surveillance implication deeply unsettling. Instead, sitting on my kitchen floor with my knees drawn up and my hands finally, not shaking for the first time in 4 days, I found it made me feel something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Safe. That was the first mistake. Not because Kang Saiwon would hurt me, that's not where this story goes. But because safety, when you've been starved of it long enough, is its own kind of gravity. And I was already starting to fall. He invited me to lunch 8 days later. A text, simply, there's something you should know about your ex-lunch, Thursday, the restaurant on your building's ground floor. 12:30. There's something you should know. 6 words designed to make it impossible to say no, and I don't think that was accidental. I was beginning to understand that very few things Kang Saiwon did were accidental. I arrived at 12:28 and he was already there, seated with his back to the wall. I'd noticed later that he was always seated with his back to the wall, with a cup of tea and no phone in his hand, which made him almost unusual in a city where everyone was always looking at something else. He stood when I approached. Briefly, correctly. "You look better than you did in the elevator," he said. "That's a low bar." Something shifted near his eyes. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. I sat down across from him and studied him in better light for the first time. He was younger than I'd initially registered, mid-30s, maybe, with the kind of face that would photograph as older because of how still it kept itself. There was a small scar along his left jawline, thin as a thread, and his hands around the tea glass were very steady. "What is it I should know?" I asked. "Daeho Lim has a restraining order violation on record from 2 years ago," he said. "Different woman. It was expunged. I wanted you to know it existed." I felt the blood leave my face. "How do you know that?" "I have a lawyer," he said simply. "She's thorough." That's sealed." Expunged means. It means the public record was removed. He looked at me steadily. I didn't say anything about the public record. I sat back in my chair. I thought about what it meant that he'd pulled sealed legal information on a man he'd met for 30 seconds in an elevator. I thought about the 90-second text response and the 3 words, "I know." "Who are you?" I asked. "Actually, I told you my name." "That's not what I mean." He was quiet for a moment. He turned his tea glass a quarter turn, clockwise, precise, and then set it down. "I manage certain interests," he said. "Some of them require that I understand situations quickly and completely. It's a professional habit. And I'm a situation." "You were a woman being cornered in an elevator." He met my eyes. "That's not a situation. That required a different kind of attention." I didn't know what to do with that. I looked down at the menu I hadn't opened. "He'll get a letter today," Siwon continued. "From an attorney. It will outline what can be proven, what cannot be proven, and what it would cost him professionally if certain information became less sealed than it currently is." I looked up sharply. "You can't. He will not contact you again." He said it with the same tone as the weather forecast. Not a promise. Not a threat. A statement of fact about the immediate future. "You can't just," I stopped, because I didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. "You can't just make someone disappear from my life with a letter? You can't just access sealed court records? You can't just know things you shouldn't know?" He was watching me with that careful, controlled expression. "I scare you," he said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't hurt. Just accurate. "You're very," I searched for the word. "Certain. About things that should be uncertain." "Yes." He didn't apologize for it. "I am." "Does that make the information less useful to you?" It didn't, of course. Damn him, it didn't. Subscribe. Because what happened next proved I was never truly safe, and neither was he. We had lunch. He asked me questions about my work with genuine interest, or what performed as genuine interest, and I told him about the Hansung campaign I was managing, and he listened in a way that most people don't listen, without forming his response while I was still talking. When he had an opinion he offered it directly, no softening, no asking if I wanted to hear it. I found I didn't mind. At 1:45 he stood to leave. He had a 2 p.m. call. "The attorney's name is Ji Soyeon," he said, setting down a card. "If Lim violates, for any reason, call her directly. Not me first. She's faster at this specific thing." I looked at the second card now sitting on the table beside his. "You had this ready," I said. "I thought you might need it. You thought you'd be handing a woman you met in an elevator referrals to your attorney." "I thought," he said carefully, "that the situation wasn't finished." He left. I watched him cross the restaurant and noticed the way the host shifted, slightly, barely visible, to give him more space. The way a man at a nearby table who had been loud on a call lowered his voice when Siwon passed. His presence shifted the room. I ordered another coffee and sat with that for a while. Over the following 3 weeks, a routine assembled itself without either of us naming it. He texted occasionally, never casually, always with specific information or a direct question. He was in my building most days, sometimes we rode the elevator together without engineering it. He never assumed I wanted company and never seemed hurt when I didn't linger. Once I saw him step off the elevator on my floor and speak quietly to a man I didn't recognize, broad, watchful, standing near the stairwell in a way that suggested he'd been standing there for a while. Siwon handed him something without looking at it and the man nodded and left. Siwon turned and saw me in the hallway. "Security consultation," he said, without me asking. I nodded. I went back to my desk. I didn't ask what kind of company required that level of security consultation on a random Tuesday afternoon. Some part of me was starting to understand that the answer would be complicated, and that I wasn't sure I was ready for complicated. Not yet. But I thought about those 3 words, "I know," and the steady hands around the tea glass, and the man in the stairwell, and something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite trust was building in my chest like a tide coming in. He made me feel like I existed inside a perimeter. Like something was watching the edges of my life and nothing unexpected would be allowed through. I knew, I had always known, that this was exactly the kind of feeling I should be suspicious of. That protection offered by someone with unclear motives is just control wearing a softer coat. But I was so tired. I was so tired of the elevator, of Daeho's face, of going small. So I let the tide come in. And tried not to think about what it would bring with it. It arrived in my work email on a Wednesday. No subject line. No sender name, just a string of random characters that IT would later tell me was a masked account, untraceable without significant effort. Inside, one attachment. A photo. Me and Kong Siwon, leaving the ground floor restaurant. Taken from across the street, telephoto, sharp enough to read the time on the clock above the restaurant door. 1:47 p.m., 17 days ago. Below the photo, one line of text. "You have no idea who you're having lunch with." I sat at my desk for 45 seconds, completely still. Then I forwarded it to Ji Soyeon and then, after a moment's hesitation, to Siwon. His response: "Don't go to your car alone today. I'll meet you at 6. Not, "Don't worry." Not, "It's nothing." He understood immediately that it was something. That scared me more than the photo. He was waiting in the lobby at 5:58. He looked at my face when I stepped off the elevator and something shifted briefly in his, too fast to name. "You're frightened," he said. "Yes." "Good. It means you're paying attention." He said it like a compliment. "Come with me." We took his car, a driver I'd never seen, who didn't speak, who took a route I didn't track, to an office building in Mapo that had no signage outside except a small brushed steel plate with a company name in tiny characters. Inside was quiet in the specific way of places that have been engineered for sound management. A woman met us in the lobby. Early 50s, severe haircut, a kind of organized calm that I recognized as either legal or intelligence background. "Park Yuna," Siwon said. "This is Director Shin." "Director of what?" I didn't ask. We sat in a room with no windows. Director Shin opened a file. The email originated from an account registered to a company called Myri Digital Solutions, she said. Which is a subsidiary of Lim Holdings. She set down a printed org chart. Daeho Lim's family company. He knew that letter wouldn't be enough, I said. My voice was flat. I was putting it together. "He's escalating carefully," she said. "The photo is a warning. He wants you to step back from certain associations." She glanced at Siwon. Something cold moved through me. "He's not actually after me. He found out who you've been spending time with," Director Shin said. "You've become useful to him as leverage." I turned to Siwon. "This is about you." He held my gaze. "Partly. Were you going to tell me?" "I'm telling you now." That's not, I stopped. I pressed my hands flat on the table and felt the cold surface and breathed. How long have you known that he found out about you? A pause. Brief. 5 days, he said. The number landed like something physical. 5 days. Don't click away now. This is where everything changed. 5 days, I repeated. And you spent 5 days, texting me normally, having normal conversations, while knowing that Daeho Lim was using me to get to you. I needed to understand the full scope before. Before what? Before you let me walk around with a target on my back? You've had a tail for 5 days, he said. You were never unprotected. That's not the point. I was standing now. I hadn't decided to stand. The point is that you knew and you didn't tell me, and that is exactly what he used to do. He used to make decisions about my life without telling me because he decided he knew better. I stopped. The room was very quiet. Siwon was looking at me, and for the first time since the elevator, his expression had moved. Not dramatically. But something had happened to the controlled surface, some hairline crack. That's not what this is, he said. Low. Careful. I know. I sat back down. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. I know it isn't. I know you're not him. My voice broke, which I hated, which I couldn't stop. I can't be something that people move around a board without asking me. I can't do that again. The silence stretched. Then, what do you need? He asked. I looked at him. Right now, he said. From me. What do you need? It was such a simple question. Daeho had never asked it. Not once, in 2 years. I need to know everything, I said. From now on. All of it. Even if you think I can't handle it. He nodded once. All right. Director Shin, to her credit, had been studying her file with great concentration throughout this exchange. All right, Siwon said again and turned to her. Show her everything. We were there for 3 hours. By the end I knew that Kong Siwon ran an organization that occupied a space between legitimate business consulting and the kind of enforcement structures that governments prefer not to acknowledge. That he had 3 ongoing legal disputes, all civil, all filed by people who had made the mistake of assuming his patience was unlimited. That Daeho Lim, having somehow connected the dots from a lobby camera, had decided that threatening me was a viable way to purchase Siwon's withdrawal from a competing acquisition. That the acquisition was for a company that would affect approximately 470 employees' livelihoods, and that Siwon's involvement was the only thing standing between those employees and a hostile stripping of assets. I sat with all of that. He picked me, I said finally, because he thought you'd back down to protect someone who didn't matter to the deal. Siwon was looking at the table. He miscalculated, he said. How? He looked up. He assumed you didn't matter to me specifically. The room was very quiet again. I'm going home, I said. Because I needed walls around me and time to think, and I couldn't think clearly with him in the room, with that sentence hanging in the air between us. I'll have someone. I know, I said. I know you will. I looked at him. Thank you for telling me everything. Yuna. He said my name for the first time. Just that. Just my name. I stopped at the door. I should have told you sooner, he said. I was in a pause. The word he chose, clearly, was not the first one that came. Careful. In a way that wasn't fair to you. Coming from him, I understood exactly how much that cost. Yeah, I said. You were. And I left. He gave me 2 days. 48 hours of space, during which his people were apparently stationed in places I couldn't see, because on the second evening I opened my apartment door to check the hallway and found nothing except a folded note that had clearly been slid under my door by someone who'd moved silently and efficiently past my building's security. The note had one line, still here. Take the time you need. Not his handwriting. His assistant's, maybe. Organized. Like everything about him. On the third day, Daeho made his move. He filed a complaint with Hansung Group's HR department claiming that I had used a personal relationship with a vendor to inappropriately influence a supplier contract, a contract I had no involvement with, that predated my time at the company by 8 months. It was completely fabricated. It was also structured just carefully enough that it required a formal investigation, which meant I was put on administrative leave pending review. I found out at 9 a.m. on a Thursday. By 9:14 I was texting Siwon. By 9:31 he was in my apartment. He'd gotten here in 17 minutes from wherever he'd started the morning, which told me he hadn't been far, which told me something he hadn't said out loud. I opened the door and he looked at my face. "Tell me," he said. I told him. All of it. The complaint, the leave, the specific wording of the HR email that had clearly been drafted by someone with legal training, someone Daeho had hired, someone who knew exactly how to make something false look plausible. Siwon listened without interrupting. He was standing in my kitchen because I hadn't offered him a seat and he hadn't assumed. He had his hands in his coat pockets and his expression was doing the thing, the nothing face, but his jaw was set in a way I'd learned to read. He was furious. In the way of still water over a very deep current. "He wants me to watch you lose your job," he said when I finished. "And then he wants me to call him and make a deal. Are you going to?" He looked at me with something that wasn't quite offense and wasn't quite patience. "No," he said. "And then, may I make some calls? From here? If that's all right." I sat on my couch. He made 4 phone calls in 40 minutes, none of them long, none of them loud. 3 of them were in Korean I understood, 1 was in English, to someone he called by first name, who apparently worked in civil litigation in a way that could move quickly when asked by the right person. The 4th call he stepped onto my balcony for. I could see him through the glass, his back to me, looking out over the city, very still. He came back inside. Ji Soyeon is filing a defamation suit against Lim personally, not against his company, against him, within the hour. It will be public record by noon. He paused. There's also the matter of the sealed record. You're going to unseal it. The woman who originally filed that restraining order, he said carefully, has been contacted by Director Shin. She's been wanting to reopen the case for 2 years. She was told, at the time, that she didn't have enough. She has always had enough. I felt something expanding in my chest. You're not doing this just for my job. No. He held my gaze. He hurt someone before you. Probably someone before her. The complaint against you is useful, but it's not the point. What is the point? The point, he said, is that it stops. At 11:50 a.m., Ji Soyeon filed. At 12:07 p.m., a journalist who specialized in corporate misconduct, a journalist who I would later understand was in no way unconnected to the network of people Kang Siwon moved through, published a piece about the newly unsealed restraining order and the pattern it suggested. At 2:15 p.m., Daeho's attorney called Ji Soyeon to discuss settlement terms. At 2:16 p.m., Ji Soyeon declined. I know all these timestamps because Siwon told them to me as they happened, sitting at my kitchen table, on his phone, relaying information in real time in the matter-of-fact way he'd have told me weather data. Like I was someone who deserved to know exactly what was happening. Like the information was mine. I got a call from Hansung Group's HR director at 4 p.m. In light of new information about the complainant's history and credibility, the investigation was being closed. My leave was lifted effective immediately. There would be a formal apology in writing. I sat with my phone in my hand after the call ended. "It's done," Siwon said. "Yeah, are you all right?" I looked at him. He was watching me with that careful, still face, and I thought about the elevator, the stop button, the absolute calm of him stepping forward, and I thought about 5 days, and the balcony call, and take the time you need slid under my door by someone who moved silently. "You chose me," I said. "Over the deal. If you hadn't, if he'd called your bluff." It wasn't a bluff. He thought it was. He was wrong about what I would protect. He said it simply. Like it had always been obvious. He was wrong about what mattered. Why? My voice came out smaller than I meant. We've known each other for a month. You had a 400-person acquisition on the line. Rationally. I'm not always rational. That stopped me. Because from him, that sentence was enormous. From a man who controlled rooms with silence and turned tea glasses exactly 1/4 turn, admitting to being not always rational was like admitting to being built differently than you'd led anyone to believe. Yuna. He set down his phone. He looked at me across the kitchen table with the measured, direct way he did everything. I pushed the stop button because a man was cornering a woman and someone had to. That part was simple. A pause. Nothing after that has been simple. The silence stretched between us, and it was a different kind of silence than his usual ones. Not controlled. Just present. I don't know what this is, I said. I don't know what we are. Neither do I. He held my gaze. But I know what I won't do. I won't make decisions about your life without telling you. I won't assume I know better than you what you can handle. And I won't, a breath. I won't pretend the last month hasn't changed something for me. Even if that's inconvenient for both of us. I thought about 2 years of someone who'd taken up all the air in every room. About going small in an elevator. About the particular exhaustion of being afraid of the person who was supposed to make you feel safe. And I thought about still water, and perimeters, and a man who stepped off a wall in a stopped elevator without raising his voice. Inconvenient, I said. Highly. I laughed. Short, surprised. Something eased in my chest. He didn't push it further. He didn't lean in or reach for my hand or do any of the things a man in a different story would do in this moment. He poured me a glass of water, set it in front of me, and started to put on his coat. Wait, I said. He waited. Ji Soyeon, I said. The other woman's case. Will it? It will go forward, he said. With proper resources this time. However long it takes. I nodded. I looked at the water glass. And the acquisition? I asked. It closed this morning. Something near a smile, finally, properly, barely. He panicked too early and moved too fast. By the time he was filing HR complaints, we'd already signed. I stared at him. 470 people, he said. You could have just told me that. Would it have helped you worry less? No, I admitted. Then I spared you. I stood up from the table. I crossed the kitchen and I held out my hand, not romantically, just clearly, just I see you, and he looked at it for 1 second and then shook it once, and I felt the steadiness of him through the contact. The absolute stillness. Same terms? I asked. Everything from now on? Everything, he said. From now on. He left. My apartment settled around me, and through the window the city was gray and ordinary, and I stood in my kitchen thinking about a stopped elevator and a card pressed into my hand, and I know arriving in 90 seconds from a man who'd apparently been paying attention since before I knew to ask him to. 3 days later, a courier delivered a document to my address. Formal letterhead. A deed of secure ownership for a private mailbox address registered in my name, legal separation of my home address from any public record. A note clipped to the front in handwriting I recognized now. Your address is your own. No one will find it who shouldn't. That was all. No ring. No declaration. No grand gesture built for an audience. Just this, someone had taken a part of my life that had been exposed and made it quietly safe. Someone had looked at the specific shape of my vulnerability and moved to cover it, precisely, without theater, without needing acknowledgement. I held the document for a long time. Then I put it in a folder, filed it carefully, and sat down at my desk. Outside, the city moved. Somewhere below my window, I knew, at least one person was being paid to stand in a place I couldn't see, watching the edges of my life. For the first time in 2 years, I found I could live inside that knowledge and breathe. Fully. Deeply. Without folding. Tell me, what moment in the story would have broken you? The elevator. The photograph. The 5 days of silence. Or the moment he chose you over everything that made rational sense? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.